to my introduction to my Kant course on mainly the critique of pure reason, but also the critique of practical reason, the critique of the power of judgment. So, I will be introducing the course, what we'll be reading and focusing on, what the lectures will focus on, and also how we will approach the entire course. But let me begin with a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche from the Fröhliche Wissenschaft, the Gay Science. In the aphorisms number 193, we find the following quote from Nietzsche on Kant. This is Kaufmann's translation. Kant's joke. Kant wanted to prove in a way that would dumbfound the common man that the common man was right or correct. That was the secret joke of this soul, of Kant's soul. He wrote against the scholars in support of popular prejudice, but for scholars and not for the people. Now, as is so often the case with Friedrich Nietzsche, it sounds witty, but it is a bit wrong. There's nothing commonsensical about Kant's transcendental idealism whatsoever. By the way, can I just say that joke is a really poor translation for the German word Witz, which is the word that Nietzsche here uses. But that's for another time to discuss. So, perhaps the midwits appreciation or understanding of Kant would agree with Nietzsche, because an average understanding of Kant would say that, Kant is simply after the limitations of reason, the limitations of what we can know, and that his so-called epistemology, as it's laid out in the Critique of Pure Reason, purely concerns itself, or mostly concerns itself, with introducing limits to reason and to knowledge. Now, that's not entirely wrong, but it is certainly not the reason why Kant is the most important philosopher of modernity. In fact, as we will learn at the course, for which you can now enroll, Kant does not write an epistemology. Instead, the revolution of thought that here occurs, and explicitly so, he looks at the form of thought. That revolution is transcendental logic and transcendental idealism, which considers the form of thought a priori before any experience. But it doesn't recur to the school metaphysical assumptions of, for example, innate ideas or concepts or categories that we are born with. It looks at the activity, the Vollzug, the enactment of knowing or experiencing, but at the conditions and the forms, the logical forms, rather than innate ideas or experience as anything that is purely empirical. So we will consider the Critique of Pure Reason as a system of principal positings, prinzipielle Setzungen. And so the self that is in question here is not the self of the everyday life. It doesn't concern human persons, but is a logical I, or a logical self. So Kant considers here the human being as a Verstandeswesen, as a being of the understanding. And reading the first critique, which Kant explicitly refers to as a logic, as in this light, in the sense of providing principal positings that ensure the binding together of the forms of thought to experience before experience. This is how Kant also, after the crude skepticism and proto-nihilistic skepticism of Hume, which leads to the collapse of the unity of being and thought, or at least a split between them, how he tries to unify being and thinking again, and hence also to bring back, let's say, scientific regularity. The reason why we can have. So let's just put it like this. The experience in Kant, what he describes is scientific experience, is scientific understanding. The reason why we can repeat experiments, at least in principle, and get to the same results again and again, is owed to, or can be explained by, the transcendental logic that is in play in Kant. So what Kant is trying to do in the first critique is to revolutionize the form of thought first, also to critique the excesses of reason, of a speculative reason that moves towards, for example, entities of the mind and applies categories to them even though they cannot be perceived, and hence he binds back together in principle, a priori, the conditions or the forms of experience to potential experience. That's perhaps one way of putting it. So when we read experience in Kant, we have to understand that, to quote from Kant himself, experience is without doubt the first product which our understanding produces or brings forth. Hervorbringt. This is in the introduction to the first edition, so you'll find this at A1. We will be moving back and forth at the course between the A edition and the B edition, and I would now like to give you an overview over the lectures. And if you have any questions on this course specifically, please let me know in the chat. I will try and get to them in the at the end. And so as people are watching this on different channels, it might be a good idea to go to my English channel. I should be able to see every comment, whether they come in from YouTube or Facebook or YouTube. So yes, that looks good. I just made sure that, so I hope you can forgive me. I will sometimes just have to make sure that, because this is a one-man band, that the technology doesn't it does work. Sorry. So the link to enroll, I have to put this in the chat, is this one here. Enrollment is now open. I will go over the lectures now. So what will be different if you've done a course with me before is that for this one, there will be no pre-recorded lectures, but it will rather be a course that is evolving with the group. So there will be live lectures during the first hour. I will be lecturing on Kant for about 45 minutes each, after which time you will be spending about 10-15 minutes in a breakout session with about 3 or 4 others, discussing the questions. You've done the reading during the week, you come prepared, you listen to the lecture. The lectures will be very text-based, so I will basically just try and explain some of the sections in Kant, some of the most important sections. We'll do that in a second here. I will be, in a couple of minutes, I will open my PDF for you, and I hope that I can actually show you this. I'm not entirely certain. Should be. Well, I'll find out if I can. So I will, in any event, I will be reading from Kant's first critique in a second on freedom, and maybe also on the Copernican turn, so-called. So as I said, if you have questions on Kant, put them in the chat now. I'm not reading them now, but I'll be getting to them in the end. If you want to enroll, the link to enroll is in the chat, but also in the description of this video if you're watching this on YouTube, which is best to watch this on that. So first I'll lecture, then a breakout session, a group session, followed by an hour or so of discussion with me and in the group, so you can ask questions. And we will be very close to the text. Obviously, we won't be reading the first critique in its entirety, but we'll be focusing on the most important sections. And hence we must begin, of course, with the prefaces. So we'll begin with the preface of the first edition, and we'll be looking at, right, the first quote here, the first passage. Human reason has a peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions, that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, but which it also cannot hope to answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. So Kant wishes to provide a system, again, of principal positings that allow for a metaphysics of nature to be written, as he explicitly states in the first critique. He never got around to writing this metaphysics, so it remains a preparatory work, as some would say. Bruno Liebrucks did come to the conclusion that the three critiques do depict Kant's system, and those who have read Hegel and Hegel's Science of Logic, some are of the view that Hegel does indeed complete Kant's critical and transcendental project. Now, to put it simply, the critique of pure reason is the Copernican turn. It depicts the Copernican turn in the history of all methodological approaches to the theoretical foundation and of what we can count as knowledge, or as experience, but as I said, in terms of all the conditions that need to be in place beforehand. And hence, what things are in themselves, the metaphysical question, is not Kant's question. So the price that we pay here for gaining a unification again of being and thinking after the split that occurs with Hume's skepticism is quite a significant one, because Kant is only concerned with scientific appearances to transcendental perception, and not so much, or not at all, with things and what they are in themselves, with the specific and unique ousia of each being. So the question really of the first critique is how does subjective, or what do subjective forms of thinking have to do with objectivity? And I would so to put it in it's very simplistic. There's no object without subject, no subject without object. There's no objectivity without subjectivity, no subjectivity without objectivity. And there is, to quote Frederick Beiser, there is a certain struggle against subjectivism that accrued skepticism also lends itself to in Kant. Now, we will first consider why Kant saw metaphysics as a battlefield. That's part of the first lecture. We will then, in the first lecture, discuss the Copernican revolution, which means that we will be, perhaps I don't even know if can I do this? I don't know, can I open? I probably can't open that now, but I should read it to you. So this is at B16 in the first critique, preface to the second edition. Up to now, it has been assumed that all our cognition must conform to the objects. but all attempts to find out something about them a priori through concepts that would extend our cognition have on this presupposition come to nothing. Hence let us once try whether we do not get farther with the problems of metaphysics by assuming that the objects must conform to our cognition, which would agree better with the requested possibility of an a priori cognition of them, which is to establish something about objects before they are given to us. So that is crucial. That's the revolution here. That is that turning off thought. We're completely moving away from considerations about things as they are in themselves, how they show themselves, but consider only the a priori necessary conditions for the possibility of experience. Now, what is also important to realize, and that is difficult in the beginning, Kant, as anyone, is a child of his own time, so he speaks in the language of his time. He speaks in the language of the school metaphysicians. So he speaks in the language of Christian Wolff and Leibniz and others. So very often it could sound as though he is basically just describing an epistemology or how he speaks of faculties, etc. So as if there were a soul bag within us. But that is not really what is at stake, especially not in the critiques. What's much more important is that we understand that this is a logical subject that explores the necessary logical conditions for the how the forms of thinking hang together with objectivity. And one of the questions that we'll be addressing is why it is that thanks to Kant's transcendental logic and transcendental idealism, we can fly airplanes and spaceships. Now, my friend Max Gottschlich once said this during a seminar on logic about 7 years ago now in Vienna, and I was struck by that remark, and it's stayed with me ever since. But to put it simply for now, the reason why, thanks to transcendental idealism, we can fly airplanes and spaceships or even just a bus or a car is nothing material at all. But, and especially when it comes to airplanes, if you know anything about the history of airplanes and aircraft, the attempts to mimic birds and how they fly didn't achieve anything. It was only when they shifted to a completely different principle that aircraft, airplanes, etc. became possible. Now, to put it simply, we determine a priori, before any experience, because no human being can really fly, how the kerosene, for example, in the engine of the aircraft or the spaceship will react, and how it will react at a certain altitude where no man ever dwells. So before any experience, thanks to transcendental idealism, we can fly airplanes. And now here's someone who asks, I cannot maybe go to this question straight away. Can you come into this course without any prior readings? I would say yes, but what I would recommend is that when you listen to this and it speaks to you and you're interested, then yes. If you fall asleep while I speak, then no. So what I would recommend also is to maybe have a look at Kant. Kant is very difficult. So what we will do is we will be basing it on some of the most important sections, go to the essential parts, not plowing through page after page after page. It might be enough just to read a few sections for every week, focus in on them, and really think them through in a group so that you understand what is at stake in the text. Hence, and I've seen now in 5 years of doing this, of teaching philosophy to a general completely random group of people who may or may never have read philosophy before. Many come, and after maybe half a year or a year, if they stick to it, if you really put in the effort, they begin to write. And you can also see the philosophical way of thinking setting in. I would even say that, with the way in which some philosophy departments are structured, for example, if it's a crudely post-structuralist, post-modernist philosophy department, then you probably will not learn how to think philosophically, but only how to read texts critically and destroy them by insinuating psychologizations. So we're looking here, when we look at Kant, at the philosopher of modernity. And if he had written something as benign as an epistemology, then he would not have become the most important philosopher. It is the complete revolution of the form of thought, of logic itself, of binding formal logic back to content a priori, in principle. That is what Kant achieves. And in so doing, he achieves also the collapse of the excesses of, for example, a crude misreading of Plato and Platonism that assumes a two-world paradigm. So we will consider first the reason why Kant writes the book, Metaphysics as a Battlefield, and the Copernican Revolution. We will always keep in mind that what Kant really is after is human freedom. So, against popular belief, Kant does not think that freedom cannot be proven. It's quite the opposite. Maybe free will can't be proven. But transcendental freedom is precisely what he's after, insofar as in transcendental thought and transcendental idealism, what opens itself up is the time and spaceless realm in which the human being also partakes, and from which the human being can initiate new causal chains. So Kant wants it both ways. He wants clear, natural law and causality, but also the human being in experience is free, or can free himself from this. So we will spend 6 lectures on the first critique. The second lecture is on time and space, the transcendental aesthetic, and the apperception. And we will here look at, maybe I'll show you what this looks like on the inside, just briefly. So on space and time, the transcendental aesthetic. So what you see here is the inside of the course. So for now, it only says what you will be reading for this week. Once we've done the lecture, once we've completed the lecture and the seminar, you'll find the video file and the audio files here. And we will also consider the transcendental logic here in this section. So that's the second lecture. The third lecture looks at, again, transcendental logic and idealism in more depth, because we now move to this crucial distinction that Kant makes between phenomena and noumena. Now, to put it simply for now, the phenomena is that which appears in the manifold to transcendental apperception, and that can be ordered. And the noumena are in the noumenal, which is, to put it simply, a limit concept which tells the understanding as well as reason not to go beyond that limit and apply categories or concepts of the understanding to, for example, let's say, the entities of the mind. So we can see that the critique of pure reason, this title itself, has the of here is a double genitive, a subjective genitive and an objective genitive. It critiques and judges, judges about the workings of pure and speculative reason, but it also shows its limits, but it also allows pure reason to critique, so to go behind the presuppositions. This is Kant's attempt. He sees it in metaphysics. What has happened is that metaphysics as it became dogmatic, forgot to consider its own presuppositions. But Kant is not a dialectician, so his approach is a different one than Plato's. We will also consider his refutation of idealism and why he thinks that it's the disgrace of philosophy, die Schande der Philosophie, to have denied the existence of the external world. This is Berkeley. So we can see that a rampant empiricism in the case of John Locke leads to magical thinking. John Locke believes in spirited matter. So he has to assume substances out there that are corporeal, but at the same time not that are not alive, but that also are enspirited in some way. And with Berkeley, another of the British empiricists, you get to the assumption that nothing exists that isn't perceived. So being is reduced to being perceived. Esse est percipi is his principle, and it is only thanks to, of course, he's worried about atheism, etc. So he comes up with this idea that could save the existence of God. But at the same time, everything is reduced down to merely being perceived. If not perceived by us, then perceived by God. So, and this, of course, once you take God out of the equation, you end up in, again, a sort of nihilism. With Hume, who completes empiricism, for example, how that the sun will rise tomorrow is purely down to habit. We cannot find regularity in the world. Hume, at least, is honest insofar as he shows us where empiricism leads us, that it leads us to experience always just running after its own experiences, as it were, and that we cannot find regularity in the world. So there's a collapse here of the unity of being and thought, and at the same time it also comes to the fore, this unity in this collapse. And of course, this even though Hume may never have read Parmenides, it ties him back to the philosophical project. So we will look at Kant's critique here also of Plato. So if you maybe just, I don't know who is around now, but if you did my Plato course with me, this might be a good continuation, even though we're leaping ahead by 2,000 years. So we will be reading his, not just the refutation of idealism, but also his criticisms of Plato, or Platonism, the axis of Platonism. And then, of course, we must not forget the deduction, the transcendental deduction of the concepts of the understanding. Kant, by the word deduction, does not mean what we usually mean by deduction. He doesn't mean to deduce the categories, but to justify their use. So he wants to show, it's a quid juris question, with what justification do the categories of the understanding. So this is always a confusion, I think, that sometimes perhaps people have, is that when we approach this section, so perhaps we assume that he's here trying to deduce the categories. That's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to justify how the categories apply to, or can be applied to, experience a priori. So we will go through the different parts of the proof that Kant here sets forth during the lecture. We will discuss here judgment, spontaneity, synthetic unity a priori, the categories, how they spring from judgment. Again, this is nothing to do with any sort of psychology, because those are temporal. But this here is in a timeless past, as it were, a timeless logical past, is what we're looking at here. So there's no order of time that is here at stake, because again, this is a system of pure principle positings. What the transcendental deduction has to show or has to prove is that something that that can fall under intuition, Anschauung, that can be in potentia be looked at, or can be perceived, maybe I put it like this for now, must also fall to or be under the auspices of the concepts of the understanding. So once we've done these first four lectures, you will already have a pretty, I'd say, good grasp of what it is that Kant is doing. He's not trying to describe everyday experience. He's trying to lay out the principles that need to be in place for, to put it simply, scientific research, for establishing certainty. Because he's very worried about fatalism, atheism, Schwärmerei. So a certain, I have to look up that word, a certain rhapsody or enthusiasm that is about in the age. Now, after these four lectures, we will move on to the transcendental dialectics and here focus on the antinomies of reason, where Kant shows us that speculative reason that isn't in principle grounded in experience will run into antinomies. And so hence we will focus here on the transcendental dialectics and purely on some of the examples. For example, there is free will, there's no free will, or the world has a beginning and an end, the world has no beginning and no end. So we'll discuss these examples and try and understand why it is that Kant addresses transcendental the dialectics of reason and how he tries to solve the dialectics of reason with transcendental idealism. Now, this is probably especially significant for anyone who's interested in Hegel and in reason in general. Why it is that reason is ultimately dialectical. And of course, in the critique itself, there is a dialectic in place. There is, for example, a dialectic between significance and use, Bedeutung und Gebrauch of concepts. But in general, perhaps I could say that this will show the limitations of empiricism. And we will also see that the usual story is that Kant unifies rationalism and empiricism. He doesn't do that. He refutes both and comes up with transcendental idealism, which is, again, not a benign epistemology, but the revolution of the form of thought itself. So I hope that you can join us. It's very likely that as the lectures are presented live and as the course evolves and we all come together as a group, that I might change a few things here or there. I had planned for the final lecture to look at the history of reason and the architecture of reason. But I might change that actually to look at Kant's refutation of attempts to prove the existence of God, for example. So at least the first 3 or 4 lectures, we should probably just focus on what I propose. But then for the 5th and the 6th lecture, we could do something or repeat certain issues that have come up for you, so that we can focus on Kant here. So as this is an evolving course, there are set topics that we will be discussing, but I'm also open to hearing what it is that you'd like to focus more on, so I can spend some time in lecture 5 and 6 on what it is that has come up in our discussion. If you have time to join the seminars, and by the way, if you have a question for me, please put it in the chat. I'll get to them later on. And if you're watching this on Twitter, maybe it's a good idea to come over to my YouTube channel, because it makes it easier for you to ask a question. I don't think that I can actually see any of the comments on Twitter. So this is the enrollment page. You find all seminar dates and live lecture dates here. We begin 2 days before Kant's 300th birthday. So he would have been 300 this year if finitude hadn't caught up with him. And I wasn't entirely certain if I could make it to his 400th. So I thought that I have to offer Kant this year. I may have another 80 years in me, but maybe not quite 100. So, April 20th, April 27th, then May 4th, 11th, 25th. We'll take 1 week off to give you time to read. So we'll have a reading week. There's no seminar. Of course, you can meet on that day for a reading group with your peers. You would have to organize this yourself. And then we have 4 more dates in June, so until the end of June. And on the 22nd of June we'll hold a pro seminar, which means that you can present your own talk on Kant or anything that's come up for you. Now, after our 6 lectures on the first critique, we'll move to the second critique, the critique of practical reason, where we will focus on freedom and practical reason and transcendental freedom. And we will see that already in the first critique, the project really was an ethical one. So if you're interested in Kant's ethics, there will at least be 1 lecture devoted to the most important aspects of how we as rational beings dwell in an ideal community, or in the kingdom of ends, as he describes it, and how this relates to phenomena and noumena and to transcendental logic more broadly. So ethics in Kant is central. We are working our way towards this. We'll then also consider in a final lecture the third critique, the sublime nature and genius. There is in the first critique a certain, let's just say, danger that nature disappears. Nature makes a comeback in the third critique. We will consider the sublime. The sublime significantly is not something external. It's not that we look at something which is awe-inspiring, which is more a Burkean notion of the sublime. The German word for that Kant uses is das Erhabene, and it is das Erhabene within. So this Erhaben, it's almost as if the subject is lifted up and lifted outwards, and lifts us also towards our freedom. And because while we may be overwhelmed this overwhelming becomes an inner aspect and pushes us over and out of ourselves. Maybe I could put it like that for now. So I'd like to invite you, if you have the time, to come to at least, let's say, 5 live lectures, group seminars. This is what you should enroll in. This middle tier here. If you don't have time, then take the self-study. This will give you access to the lectures as they are recorded live. So we will upload them afterwards the same night. So you'll have them probably on the Saturday, at the latest on a Sunday. And there will also be handouts, short ones, just a few concepts will be explained on the handout, etc. You can print them off. If you'd like to take philosophical private dialogue sessions with me, you can do this as well. This is here, so you can just maybe have a look over all. But these are the main ones here. If you'd like to take the group seminars, this is the one for you. If you don't have time for them, then take the self-study. If you'd like to discuss with me personally on Zoom meetings, as these are one-on-one sessions, then this one is for you. Always, of course, when you enroll, you support the work on this channel, and you are a patron of Philosophia. Now, let's see if there are questions that so I've answered the question whether you can come into this course with any prior readings. Let me see. So I don't know about. So there's a question about Rudolf Steiner. So I would say about. So I haven't read much by Rudolf Steiner. I have not read anything by him, to be honest. But no, Steiner is not perhaps one of the greatest philosophers, and I would not refer to Steiner if you want to understand Kant. He probably is informed by Schopenhauer, who did not understand Kant. Kant is not so much interested in das Ding an sich, the thing in itself, but concerned with things in themselves which are pushed into the noumenal, because this is a metaphysical concern that will come later. The concern is not about recognizing what we can know, etc. It's not so much about we can't recognize the thing in itself. That's this kind of midwits average understanding of Kant. I mean, if all that Kant said was there are limits to what we can know, then again, that's so harmless, benign, and obvious that it would never have led to a revolution of thought. What Kant is after is something else. It's not to say, oh, we can't recognize things as they are in themselves. Instead, what he's after is binding the concepts of the understanding to, a priori, to the possibility of experience. Intuitions without concepts are blind, he reminds us. So, and as it is not a metaphysics, as this is just a preparation for a metaphysics, as he says, and this metaphysics perhaps is precisely the one that we find in Hegel's Science of Logic. The metaphysics would concern then, or address what things are. But here we're concerned with the form of thought. So Rudolf Steiner makes exactly the mistake that one shouldn't make when you read Kant. When you assume that Kant writes an epistemology, this is the outcome. These kinds of readings that are everywhere. This is improper. This is not how we will read Kant, or else we will forever not understand Kant. We will end up perhaps like Arthur Schopenhauer, who believed that Kant was endlessly not recognizing das Ding an sich, das Ding, the thing in itself, to which Schopenhauer supposedly found the key. So, if you have more questions, let me know. I also want to stress again that enrollment is now open. We have limited spaces available on this course. Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, I hope you can join us. Ben, I'm not entirely certain I understand your question. Could you explain whether modern understanding of Kant is cut off from the world, is a projection? I don't understand the question, to be honest. You would have to say a bit more. I mean, who's projecting this? I don't know. So what Kant is trying to do is, again, it has nothing to do with how we experience the world. It has everything to do, it's not talking about personhood or existential experience. It's not phenomenology. It's not existentialism. It's to do with establishing how subjective forms of thought relate to objectivity. That is what we're after. And that has everything to do with upholding scientific certainty and regularity and repeatability. So if you're interested in science, technology, in brackets also accelerationism, then you have to understand Kant really strictly in this manner. But at the same time, also, and this is where accelerationists go wrong, because they forget about freedom, is that what Kant at the same time also always wishes to guarantee for is human freedom, not self-reflection, not reflection back upon the self, etc., but genuinely how human freedom is possible and also necessary. Well, yeah, so, yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, in that sense, it's a projection. I would, I was just looking at Ben Ezra's question. But you see, but this is irrelevant, whatever. We can project anything. Anyone can say anything. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is that we understand Kant if we want to understand our time. So, thinkers in so-called accelerationism will endlessly beat on about Kant, but will never mention or even consider transcendental freedom. The freedom that is yonder of experience, that is outside time and space, that is not psychological. So this is perhaps what so the title of the course is Kant's Battle for Freedom. So really the main question will always be freedom. We are considering Kant and the Enlightenment, how it is that Kant is the king of the Enlightenment, but also as the king, the one who overcomes the Enlightenment. So if you have more questions, by the way, on Kant and on this course, then ask the question and I'll try and respond. How is the rapprochement of Kant and Descartes as villains of modernity that enclose us in our subjectivity true? And how is it mistaken? Well, so do you mean understanding instead of rapprochement? Do you mean Well, so how is that reception? Maybe that's a better word. How is the reception of Kant and Descartes as villains of modernity that encloses in our objectivity true, and how is it mistaken? Well, there's no enclosure in Descartes. Absolutely not. There's a tripartite structure, God, world, self, that where one cannot be without the other, and the ego or the res cogitans is active. Descartes is terrified of the projects of modern science and how this could be an impediment to human freedom. We should also, and this enclosure in subjectivity is, I think, it's a bit of an oversimplification that sometimes perhaps is there in Heidegger, but he means something. I think he means something a bit different. So, what Kant sees, though, when it comes to Descartes, and this is something we'll be discussing at the course, Kant points out in the introduction to the second edition, in the preface, not the introduction, in the preface to the second edition, at B30 or so, I think B30, he points out that what B27 to B31, so yeah, roughly, he points out that to consider the self or the soul a thing is this kind of reification, or any reification of that sort, that doesn't consider the activity that comes before. So we're not born innate with certain ideas or categories, but it is in the activity of thinking prior to experience, let's say, that freedom can be ensured, while at the same time also having the, let's just say, external world under natural laws. So, and instead of thinking of them as subjectivist, again, as I said before, there is no subject. There's no subject without object. Subjective form. So, sapere aude, have courage to think for yourself, does not mean that you just come up with your own crude ideas. It's not. We're not describing personhood. We're describing the logical subject, the logical transcendental subject in which we participate. And the mistake that perhaps someone like Heidegger makes, a thinker like Heidegger, is to reify or to read this almost too verbatim, the notion of subject, etc. And then reify it himself. What we're after here is always non-reification and the activity, the enactment of thought, of thinking. Okay. But you see, there are, for example, in Fichte, for example, who continues the Kantian project, there is, of course, a certain threat of subjectivism, but they're acutely aware of it. And they struggle against it. It's not as though they simply enclose us. It's an issue of its time, and of our time, of course. But this blame game that has, we can point to this one figure and this one figure over here, that is always very short-sighted. So you must have come late to this, because I've gone over this. I would want to hear your thoughts about what's the relation of the thing in itself to our cognition, if there's any. Again, Kant speaks mostly of things in themselves, and these are metaphysical concerns. So the ousia, the essence of something, is not the question of the first critique. The question of the first critique is not even our cognition, but the question of the first critique is how the subjective forms of thought relate to objectivity, so that an object comes about through transcendental apperception and the application of the categories applied to the manifold, so that a proper object appears. And this is a scientific approach, let's say, that it tries to establish certainty and regularity, and does not, and purely, again, a priori. It is, as it were, a groundwork for a future metaphysics. Good question. So, and this is, so the questions that we're addressing now, these will be exactly the questions in the first seminar, I can imagine, that this is what we will be discussing. We're trying to get to the heart of the matter right from the start, so that we can make sure that we don't get caught up in the many misunderstandings in Kant and narrow readings. For example, as an epistemology or so. But really as a complete revolution of the form of thought itself. So I would like to invite you all to join me at this masterclass in honor of Kant's 300th birthday. Will be beginning 2 days before his actual birthday, on a Saturday, the 20th of April. And I will be lecturing first, followed by a group discussion and group discussion with me, but also breakout sessions that we'll have with your peers. It'll be a smaller group than in my other courses, because I want to make sure here that we can stay really focused on the text. So we won't be plowing through all 600-700 pages, depending on how many your translations have, 800 of the first critique, but we will be focusing on the most important sections and consider really trying to understand how this revolution of thought occurs. Now, here's a question: do you have any thoughts on how this misunderstanding came about? So misunderstandings always come about. I may be misunderstanding Kant. One of the reasons, of course, is that when someone writes, so Heidegger is another good example. Heidegger writes "Being in Time," and it's assumed that it's some sort of existentialism, but it is fundamental ontology. That's something very different from existentialism. In Heidegger, there's no concern whatsoever of how we make ourselves. Nothing. Dasein self-investigates transcendentally, by the way, and in so doing discovers its existentialia on which to ground the ontologies of the sciences. It's a Kantian project. And someone like Schopenhauer isn't perhaps too aware of of what the actual concern by Kant is, but this is why he's not counted as one of the German idealists. Because he doesn't, in fact, see that Kant criticizes dogmatic metaphysics, and that after Kant, such a either naive realism, as it has, of course, made a big comeback the past 20 years, or dogmatic metaphysics is any longer, I mean, it's still possible, but it's not perhaps really where thought now needs to be. So the logical continuation of Kant are Fichte, Salomon Maimon, Reinhardt, and Schelling, and of course especially Hegel, who with his science of logic provides us with the unfolding and development of the categories, immanently so, and also with a complete sublation of the presuppositions of thought. It begins without presupposition, what it is that Kant attempts but doesn't do, because he doesn't fully allow for the, or at least wants to get around the dialectics of reason. So let me point out again that enrollment is now open. I'm about to leave. If you follow the link, so if you know anyone who's interested in Kant, please can you share this video with them. We will begin in about a month from now. This is the course enrollment page. Once you're enrolled, you'll see what to read for the first week. I'll also be in touch via email a week before the first seminar, so you know what to expect. You can either take this for self-study if you don't have time to join the group seminars. If you do have time for the group seminars, then this is for you. If you'd like to do private sessions with me, plus the group seminars, etc., this one is for you. There's also the option of doing just one session with me. There's a payment plan, etc., etc. So I hope that you can join us. You can see again here the lectures, and this is a rough outline. I think the first 4 will follow those, and then perhaps we change the last 2 around a bit, depending on how the group develops and what you're interested in. We'll also consider the second critique and the third critique. So I hope that you can join us, and join us soon, because the sooner you start reading, the better. The readings are listed here. You can see them. For example, this is for the first lecture, The Battlefield of Metaphysics and the Copernican Revolution. You'll be reading the preface to the first edition, especially this here. Then you see it's just a few pages. That's maybe 2 pages or so. Then the Copernican turn, that's maybe 4 or 5 pages. Another 5. Of course, you can read more. So you can read the 2 prefaces and the 2 introductions. There will be about, I think, maybe 50 or 60 pages. I'm also including sometimes some screenshots of sections that makes it easier for you just to focus in on what we want to read. So here, what's important here is experience is without doubt the first product that our understanding brings forth as it works on the raw material of sensible sensations. But it's important to understand here what Kant really means by this is that experience is the first product that the understanding brings forth, but brings forth in the sense of even, I would say, without sense data, and rather
the raw material we really have to understand here in an Aristotelian sense as the potentiality for for uh, for sense data, let's say, so that the understanding comes first, and this is crucial also to understand Kantian ethics, etc. All right, so this is what this looks like on the inside. We'll be spending about 2 hours every week, and if you do sign up for the seminars, you'll get access to the course forum. You can also present your own talk at the end. So if you want to write something, also during the course, then you can submit a couple of essays to me, and I'll respond to you with comments, not feedback. I refuse the word feedback. I'll send you comments. I'll try and help you improve your writing and improve your argumentation style, etc. This will be a difficult course. If you've never read Kant, maybe that's even better. If you've never read anything about Kant, maybe that's even better, because it would mean that you have not yet been spoiled by psychologizations or narrow readings of this as some sort of epistemology. Again, we'll be looking at this in terms of the revolution of the form of thought that occurs here, so that we understand really what happens here. This is a moment of incision, and it cannot just be wiped away by saying, oh, he encloses us in subjectivity, etc. None of this gets at the heart of the matter. That is too simple. We can only understand our time if we have a sound understanding of Kant and Kantian philosophy. So, thank you very much for listening. If you know anyone interested in Kant, share this video with them. If you'd like to join the course, this is the link to enroll. And I hope to see you in about 3.5 weeks when we begin. Thank you very much. Thank you.